Time to talk about the last planet on your planet note sheet. Or is it a planet? Make sure you fill out right here. You'll also be flipping this note sheet over later and taking some more notes today. Anyway, let's talk about Pluto. Pluto's composition is made of ice and rock, which is totally different than all of the outer planets, which are made of gas. They might have some ice, but no rock. So very different there. Its temperature, cold, but it varies. Sometimes it's colder than others. It's the smallest. It's actually what's referred to as a dwarf planet. And this is where we're going to take a little trip to a different part of your note sheet here. Okay. So we're actually going to go to this part of your note sheet on the last page up above here where it says dwarf planets. We're going to talk about that. All right. So what is the deal? First, we got to figure out, here's our solar system, right? And then we got to figure out, we've got all these planets. So what's the difference between these planets? We have different areas within our solar system. What is a major planet? It's got to orbit the sun, okay? It should be spherical shaped. So that means like a basketball, right? And it needs to have cleared out its orbital path, meaning that there's not a bunch of other junk in its orbital path. Moons are okay, but it should have a clear path where it's the dominant object and nothing else is there. So if you look at this, there's two red boxes in our solar system. One is in the asteroid belt and one is this area called the Kuiper belt. And if they're in there, if you have an object in there, it's not a major planet because there's a bunch of junk there, right? So what exactly makes it a dwarf planet then? Well, here you go. It's still going to orbit the sun. It's still going to be spherical in shape. So if it's those two things, that's okay. It's not a dwarf planet yet. But this is the big one. It has not cleared its orbital path. You can see in the asteroid belt, we have a dwarf planet called Ceres, which is round, orbits the sun, but it hasn't cleared its orbital path. In the Kuiper belt, we have multiple dwarf planets. Pluto is one. You can see one called Makemake, one called Iris. These are all objects in the Kuiper belt, but there's a bunch of other junk there. So they are not considered major planets. They're called dwarf planets. Understand me, dwarf planets does not refer to their size. It's very deceptive, okay? But that's not what it means. Okay, so moving on. More about Pluto. The reason why it's a dwarf planet, because it has a dirty orbit, okay? It takes 6.4 days to spin around. That's not real fast. And it takes 240 Earth years to go around the sun one time. As a matter of fact, since we've discovered Pluto, it hasn't even completed one orbit yet, which is pretty wild. We're not sure that it has a magnetic field. When we sent the New Horizons spacecraft by, it didn't detect one, maybe because it's so small, maybe because it doesn't spin very fast, not exactly sure. It does have 5 moons, and one of them, which you can see in this image, is Charon, and it's actually roughly the same size as Pluto. They orbit really close together, and they're tidally locked, which means the same sides always face each other. So that's kind of weird as well. The other moons are small, Nix, Hydra, Styx, and Kerberos. They're these very small, and they have these chaotic orbits, and they think maybe they're actually pieces left over from when Charon and Pluto formed, which they think was like an impact, just like our moon formed, and those are just little leftover pieces from that. It does have an atmosphere. In that atmosphere is nitrogen and methane. The surface features, it has mountains, it has craters, and it has the largest glacier in the solar system. Some of those mountains are 11,000 feet tall, like the Rocky Mountains. So that's pretty wild. Some unique features, it has an odd orbit, which means it's tilted 11 degrees off of the orbit of all the other planets in our solar system. And it's actually more elliptical, stretched out. So there are some times where it's farther away and sometimes where it's closer. It's actually inside the orbit of Neptune, so closer to the sun than Neptune is. And so it has a seasonal atmosphere. When it's far away, too cold, the atmosphere freezes. When it's closer, it warms up enough, and it does have an atmosphere. And that synchronous rotation I already talked about, where Pluto and Charon face each other as they orbit the whole time. We've sent one spacecraft there. It got there in 2015. It was a flyby mission. And all of these images that I've showed you today have been from the New Horizons spacecraft. We really didn't have any close-up images at all of Pluto or have any idea what it looked like until that spacecraft went by in 2015. Okay, awesome. That's all you got to do today.